opening question I have here, so whoever would like to take this, is how can investors and other stakeholders identify promising early stage space startups? And obviously, as they're depending on in terms of scaling, they need the cash in order to do so. And what criteria should be used to evaluate these companies?
I guess I'll jump in there, Martinez. I kind of as some opening thoughts on that, and I get this question, similar questions all the time. I think for investors and stakeholders, the future really is about, what companies are actually solving problems that focus on the technical gaps that are currently limiting our path to that $1 trillion economy, right? There's certain key technical areas that what's going to enable a persistent presence for autonomous and human presence in the LEO, GEO, and cislunar space that are really going to allow the growth to occur. And then the technical gaps and the cost and capability, continuing to innovate around these key areas that enable that persistent presence are a great first cut. And you can dissect that down further. But as far as an opening answer, I think, in my opinion, I think that's where, if I am an investor and looking at the landscape, there's a certain amount of gaps that I see from a technical standpoint that need to be addressed still, because governments and nation states are still the prevailing presence in terms of moving beyond and expanding human presence and operation, which provides this large market opportunity to the future. But that's not going to be able to do everything. So, and it can't do it at the cost and the price point that are actually going to allow the space economy to expand. So that would be my take at the high level, and we could certainly drill that into that further.
Hey, this is Samson from Milky Way. I'm sitting in for George today. Just one of the things we want the entrepreneurs to know is understand, are you in the space industry or the space economy? Because that's going to really help determine your ability to scale. So if you build a rocket, a satellite, you're in the space industry. You're doing anything with data coming down into the gravity well of Earth, you're in the space economy. And so that's why that's important, is we will only have a few rocket providers, a few satellite manufacturers, but the bulk of opportunity and revenue will come from companies who aren't creating a little widget to put on a satellite, but are harnessing that data and monetizing it here on Earth. So keep that in mind, because again, we're only going to have a few rocket providers, but when it comes to monetizing that data and how you use it, that's where you're going to have that. That's where you can have that exponential growth curve. So just again, understand: is your business in the space industry, or is your business in the space economy?
Okay, got it. Thank you for those answers. So the following question that I have here for somebody who would like to answer that. So how can early stage startups effectively build partnerships? And in some cases, we see that individuals can do that successfully by themselves. So what will be your approach or advice in building those partnerships and collaborations with established companies and organizations in the space industry that could help them with their personal growth?
Shall I come in there? Hi, I'm Portia, and I'm from UK Space Agency. For me, I think what startups and growing companies can really do is several things. I think one thing that's vital is networking. So actually getting out there, and I think for a lot of startups, they spent a lot of time working on the technology without actually maybe understanding what the market is or who they need to go to. So I actually think get out there, come to events like this, networking events and conferences within their own countries, and really getting themselves out there and being able to clearly articulate their business as opposed to just their technology. Because I think if you're talking to people who aren't necessarily, they might be an investor, but they don't actually necessarily know about the technical aspects. It's being able to articulate your value as a business, as opposed to the actual nitty gritty of what they're doing. So for me, every time it will be find yourself a network, get yourself into an ecosystem where those larger companies and those primes are based and those customers are based, to be able to get used to working with them and talking with them on a regular basis.
I guess I would add to that as well. You know, I see this all the time where, to Portia's point, companies don't understand what their business really looks like to the outside world. And part of that is they have not yet engaged their customer community in enough detail to understand what problem they're actually solving. So if you as a business don't understand in detail at multiple depth levels what you're solving for the industry, and you can't communicate that to larger primes and partners, you're not going to be able to develop those relationships, because I think you're seeing a return to business fundamentals in a strong way with the change in the macroeconomic conditions. And what that means is the days of, you know, free-flowing venture capital are over, and it's back to the old days of, is your business fundamental? What problem are you solving? Who cares about that problem being solved? Do you understand how to build an effective organization around that problem? And what problem can you solve both for the broader customer community and these primes that serve that customer community? So if you don't have that fundamental understanding to yourself as a business, you're never going to convince a larger partner to want to come along with the ride. And if you don't understand not just the overall big picture problem, you're never going to understand the particular pain point of the partners you're chasing. So you have to understand where you fit in the industry, what the industry's problems look like, and which problems that your partner's trying to solve, so you can address that to get their interest. And that's really key. If you're not helping them solve a problem they have, it's never going to happen. And without that fundamental knowledge, you're putting yourself at an extreme disadvantage.
So
Yeah, and Martinez, if you don't mind.
Yes, go ahead.
Jumping in here, Patrick Shannon, CEO and founder of TrustPoint. Really great to be on the panel this morning with everybody. I kind of want to piggyback a little bit on what Portia and Jeff said. You know, when Portia got into the whole concept about networking, you know, you can't emphasize the value of it. And I'd go one step further, especially coming out of COVID, and you know, people almost, you know, fully back to normal travel schedules. Go see people in person, especially at these big primes. You want to work with successful, busy, profitable partners. Those are the same people that are difficult to engage with because they're busy, because they have lots of people knocking on the door. Go to their site, take them out to lunch, buy them a cup of coffee. Very simple things in person elevates you in their priority list from just another email, just another video chat, to someone who's putting some time and effort into getting to know that entity and that individual. And I, you know, that in and of itself gets you, you know, it's not just in the door, right, which a Zoom call can handle, or a couple of emails back and forth, but it gets you into their kind of mindset, the front of mind. And you can demonstrate your capability to understand their business, right? Like Jeff mentioned, hey, you got to know your value proposition to them, know their value proposition to their customers too, so you can dovetail in, take a much bigger perspective. And then beyond just networking and building relationships, you know, find the people you know and ask them who the right decision makers are, right? Again, a lot of these partners, the primes in particular, you know, in the aerospace defense community, but also just telecom primes, right, that play a major role in the space industry. They're big organizations. There's people who have budgetary control and authority. There's people who have communication authority, new R&D project initiation authority. And you got to understand those internal kind of organizational structures, so you can leverage the relationships you build after you know your own value proposition, after you know their value proposition. So go see people in person. And you know, sometimes that's more expensive, but I think, you know, a handful of expensive 30 to 60-minute meetings easily trump, you know, a week or 3 of email or 1 or 2 Zoom calls.
I would like to add on to Patrick's statement that in person is actually cheaper. Once you run the numbers, in person is actually cheaper than online marketing to Twitter, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn. So you might think, oh, airfare, hotel, etc. The ROI of in person is exponentially cheaper. And one of the things we tell our portfolio companies is you can only make peace with your enemies. I'm going to say that again, because you can only make peace with your enemies. The more novel your application is, and the more novel your technology is, there's probably a dozen people in the world who do what you do, who are going after the same SBIR, STTR grants or funding. Identify them, go make friends, because that means if you think they're your enemy or they're your competition, it means they're worthy adversaries, they're worthy competitions. If you want to come up with something where a prime might want, go find folks who are at your level, who are your peers, and go make friends with them, join forces, because that helps you exponentially, because your team is probably 2 to 5 people, and you need a couple other people to help you come together with that key solution that the primes are actually looking for. And so just a reminder, you can only make peace with your enemies, that which really is saying, don't let your ego get between you and collaboration.
Hi there, Sana Kelly. I'd like to join in now on this. I'm getting some feedback on some. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so it's a good idea also, I think, to consider at what stage a startup might be. And when we're thinking about the startup, I might want to consider to which customer are we dealing? Are you talking about a startup that's focused on the upstream sector? It's kind of related to what Samson was saying, how there was, are you in the space industry, or are you dealing with the downstream sector, which was like the knock-on, the economy, where you can use those applications that you can generate from the space sector. For startups, some that have just begun, the ones that are early, sometimes they can benefit from competitions that are raised by space agencies. So I know that ESA often has these challenges that really presents a gap. And I think we mentioned that earlier, finding that gap in which to develop that capability. If you can actually pitch the solution, often that's actually a stepping stone to meeting the right people and developing that network and getting that guidance sometimes that startups or engineers or the small teams that just begin can move forward to find out, okay, well, what are the next steps towards commercialization? How do you take this from just a technology, which I think a lot of startups in the space sector are focused on developing, to making it something that's accessible beyond the space domain and to like the general public. And then that customer changes from having an anchor customer that might be an agency or might be a prime to becoming ubiquitous or used in everyday applications.
Conrad, I don't think we can
Conrad.
hear well. I think there's
Conrad, you're talking, we can't hear you.
You're just a delay or some connection issue. Sorry about this. So I'd like to move on. Maybe while we're fixing the issue here, Conrad, we appreciate it. I'd like to come back to something that Jeff said, is understanding again what your purpose is and kind of building onto your purpose. But I think there's a lot of people here probably in the room, if you're watching again recordings of these sessions, you might think that you have a potential to solve a problem, in the industry, because that's what at the end of the business is, and space business is just a business. I say that all the time, just for people not to get confused. It is a business, but for people to understand, I think we have to go back to what are the issues with the industry. So maybe you can talk about the issues, and with that also about the most promising areas for growth and innovation in the space industry, and how those early stage startups can best position themselves to take advantage of these opportunities as well.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump back in and say, I think there needs to be a clear understanding among space entrepreneurs that not every business is a venture backable business, and that's okay. There's multiple ways to grow a company. If you are chasing venture capital to be a venture-backed business, there's some key ingredients that you're going to need to have to be successful. And not only are you going to need to understand what problem you're solving in the industry, you're going to need to have multiple customers who care about that problem, that want to buy that solution. And you're going to have to show investors that you can actually address a significant portion of that market opportunity so that you can achieve the levels of growth that those investors are looking for in those portfolios. I think, one of the lessons I personally learned early on with my first startup was, I think there's this romantic vision of I'm going to start a company and I'm going to solve the world's problems and I'm going to grow this phenomenal business. And then you get into the reality of really needing to understand what the market actually needs. And are you going to give the market what it needs? Or are you going to keep chasing what you're interested in or what the business thinks it's interested in? And that's not going to work. You have to align all of those things for venture capital to want to come in and help you grow your business and show that you know how to tap into that addressable market opportunity. Now, there comes a point where if you can't show a big enough addressable market opportunity for your business, that's okay. There's other financial tools out there to help you grow your business. You can bootstrap your business. It might be a slower process, but if you have customers that want to buy what you're selling, you should find alternate ways to pursue it. And it may not be venture capital. And I think my advice to those ventures that are struggling with that is, be patient, but be real about what your real market opportunity is. If you're passionate about a certain solution that you're experts in and you really see it solving a problem in some corner of the industry, then go chase it. But don't get disappointed when VC tells you you're not venture backable or you don't have enough addressable market size. That's not a game ender for your business. But I think my initial response to what you were asking, Martinez, is there's multiple avenues to grow a business. Ventures get caught up in this trap that they should only chase VC, and then they don't understand what the criteria really are for a VC to want to play. And I see that as a limiting factor for a lot of companies. They wait too long to realize that lesson and they're out of runway and then they have no place to go. And actually, you're seeing that quite a bit in the marketplace right now in space where runways are diminishing, right? I mean, let's talk about the reality of the finances of most space companies right now that are startups. They don't have a lot of runway. They don't have a lot of opportunities for additional financing. They're struggling to figure out what that looks like. And so it's kind of get real time for a lot of businesses out there. And the sooner you come to this realization and look for other ways to sustain your business, the better chances for your survival are going to be through 2023 in these uncertain economic times.
And I'll just add to that, promising for startups. We're big fans of software versus hardware, to sum it up simply. Software talk for GIS, Geographic Information Systems, drones. When you're looking at fifth industrial revolutionary warfare, it's all about drones in the sense of there is a hardware component to drones, but how do you communicate and secure those communications to those drones? Edge compute, super big fans of edge compute because we lose most of the data in space. And then anything AI machine learning, because when it comes to orbital robotics, there are various entities who build the carapace, the arms, the robots themselves, but what software actually runs them? Where's that version of Jarvis? So those are the things that we're looking for that are very promising. But the thing to keep in mind, this is pretty much general across the space industry. You need $1.8 million for your first 12 months of burn and $3.5 million for your first 24 months of runway. It's pretty standard across the industry unless you have something that burns a propellant, in which case multiply it by 7.5. Because hardware just is super expensive. There's no way around it. So just keep that in mind. If you're looking for what's your avenue into the space economy, we all love rockets, right? We all want to love rockets, but software, at least from our perspective for Milky Way, is where it's at.
I'll jump in on the back of Samson's topic there. If you do have to go hardware, you can spend a majority of your new innovating efforts on software solutions that better, invoke that hardware. There's a lot you can do early on before you've gained traction, before you've gained contracts, revenue, government support with a little bit of money, right? If you're spending their first 24 months doing software and that software will eventually be deployed to some hardware, but that's where your innovation is. I think there's a great opportunity to buy down risk in your business affordably for the first couple of years. And then you start integrating some of that hardware element on the back end after you have a bit of a track record, after you have some contracts or some other things to get you going. So it doesn't need to be all software, but if you have a very clever way to make a lot of progress with software early on, and that's a strategy TrustPoint's been able to leverage quite a bit recently. There's some great progress and there's a nice path there.
For the question here for the government representatives, as we have here a few of individuals, and thank you for your time. We have today with us Portia and Charles. So Portia is obviously from UK Space Agency. Charles is from Kenya Space Agency. So the question is for you, but also for everybody at the same time. So what role do government programs and initiatives play in supporting early stage space startups, and what steps can be taken to ensure that these programs are effective and responsive to the needs of the industry? Thank you.
Go first and share the perspective that I have from the Kenya Space Agency and what you're doing in Africa. And again, as you would potentially know, there's a lot of growth opportunities for startups within this region because space is new business, and there are a lot of opportunities to grow both in the upstream as well as the downstream. But how government plays, what role they're playing as government organizations within this region is to create the opportunities for other sectors to get into the market. I will give the example of the IT sector within Kenya, which has been doing pretty well. But we're trying to get them into the space sector because essentially they have some kind of growth happening within the IT, and they have that support system, or they have already established financial streams for them to be able to perform well. But now what you're trying to do, because of the interface now between the GIS component and the IT sector, so we're trying to get them interested in this, to get into the space sector. And now, what again we're doing is having or ring fencing some amount of our business for what we call the small, medium enterprises, as well as the startups as well. And again, one of the initiatives that we've done too as a government agency is we had a challenge recently where we were trying to encourage, it was on Earth observation, applications on Earth observation. And the intention was to try and shine the light on the potential of solutions being provided by the startups. And then the other element is we had given research grants on development of some applications, and that is what we're trying to look at. And then to the question where you're asking what steps we could take to ensure that they're sustainable, is to ensure that there is business for them. And also one of the other things that we're trying to do is also connect them to the industry. So when you have forums where we're sharing what we're doing within the space sector, or we have expos and exhibitions, then we encourage them to also to exhibit, because also that opens up the markets to them that potentially are not available for them.
I think from a UK perspective, you know, one of the ways that I think the UK government plays a very important role in supporting early stage businesses is with our national space strategy. So it actually publishes and defines the government's ambitions. So I think people either within companies within the sector, or either maybe in adjacent sectors with space applicable products and services, they can actually see what the government wants to do and what their ambitions are with space. So I think that strategy gives a clear message to what we want to do. The more difficult thing, I think, is around delivering on that strategy. And again, one of the big things that I think that from a UK perspective that we do is building that ecosystem of support, and but not only, you know, in a specific place, either sort of like in the UK, sort of like around London, but actually what we're doing is we're developing that space ecosystem all around the UK. So where there are local capabilities and strategies that includes space-related ambitions, then our role as government then is then to sort of connect that ecosystem and then champion that ecosystem to be able to, again, sort of like be able to convey that, the UK has a cohesive space sector. And it's not just in the places where it's really expensive, for example, to live and set up a business, but you will have equal support and community wherever you choose to sort of like set your business from a sort of like a an inward investment perspective. So I think those are really important things. And in terms of sort of like how we make sure that they are responsive and effective in terms of industry, we have a big, we have a national space partnership, and that is a partnership between government, industry, and academia, so that we then look at, bringing government to the table and actually having those sort of like, grassroots level conversations with industry, with academia, that then is fed up into the national policy making.
I'm not from the government, but I live in Washington, D.C., so I play a government official on Twitter from time to time. Just a note for all of the entrepreneurs and the spacepreneurs, at least here in America, Uncle Sam has all the money. And so why that's important to know is you got to apply for your STTRs, your SBIRs, because your VCs, when they say they want to see traction, they want to know what awards you've won, who's your customer. So you definitely have to look to your government folks for that initial $250,000 non-diluting grant before you're going to run off, because Jeff's not going to write you a check if you haven't won something, because often the VCs, they just don't understand the technology, not because they're stupid, it's just because you're introducing something so novel and new that there's a dozen people on the planet, and at least here in America, the other half do not speak English, they speak standard Mandarin. It's going to be incredibly difficult to get funding from the US government if the other half of your team is speaking standard Mandarin. And from the government side, for Portia and Charles, because you do have all the money, space awareness, education, super important. Let people know the verticals of the space economy. It's not just the space industry. And I feel like a part of the space economy that gets the least amount of love, that has the highest potential, is space ports, the physical locations where you can launch stuff from. Because again, a rocket builder is like an Uber driver. You can get space on someone's rocket. If you really, really want to say, hey, we have a rocket, fine, someone's got plans for that, but you still have to launch it from somewhere. So I feel like from the government side, don't just look at software and hardware, also think, are we building a spaceport in our region? And I'll conclude by saying Dubai is Dubai because they have the greatest airport. So if you're thinking about being a space actor, think, what are we doing for our spaceport?
Okay, so yeah. Thank you for all the answers. So I'd like to just move on to a quick question to Conrad here, because we greatly appreciate your input as you're currently far away from where we currently are located. You're in Australia and it's 2:30 a.m. right there. So there's a question for you. What does the space startup industry look like in Australia currently at the moment? And what are some of the Australia Space Agency and Australian government initiatives to help grow the space industry as well? Thank you.
Okay, so the space industry is emergent in Australia. We've had a space agency since 2018. So ours is one of the newer space agencies. And while it does have funding, it doesn't have the funding, for example, that you might get with NASA. What the Australian Space Agency has done is a little bit like what Portia was saying. They've defined some key strategic areas and areas of expertise that different parts of Australia have. They've put some investment into, I guess, centers of excellence, which startups can then engage with. So while the startup's not going to, get hundreds of millions of dollars from the space agency, they will be able to engage with those center of excellences. Like there's a center here we have in Western Australia focused on robotics and automation, for example. The other thing that that we can benefit from as a startup here in Australia through the Space Agency is their international connections. So, for example, with the UK Space Agency and the Australian Space Agency, we had this thing called the Australia-UK Space Bridge, where there's the ability for entities in Australia and in the UK to work together and benefit from greater funding. And more recently, the government has just put forward some funding which startups could apply for. It's called the International Space Investment Funding, and this is with India. So we're starting to develop that relationship with the Indian Space Agency and India as well. So there's quite a bit that the Space Agency is doing, and in fact, our Space Agency probably acts a little bit more like a startup rather than a large established organization with a lot of money. There are about 600 startups in Australia. Back in about 2016, there were probably about 50. So it's grown quite a bit. And the big focus here is what a lot of the speakers have spoken about is make sure you solve a problem that someone actually has. So as an example, and I'll give you quite a specific one, agriculture is a huge thing here in Australia. And farmers get a return on investment of about 3 to 5%. So that's the margin on their crops. So it's not a lot. So as a startup, if you're looking to find that problem to solve that many people have that will generate a lot of revenue, if you can help improve that 3 to 5% margin that farmers have or allow them to better use it, then that's a good thing. So precision agriculture is something that they've really taken to with farming. So there's the opportunity there for startups. And more so now we're looking at the more advanced analytics related technologies, which, for example, startups can engage with the agricultural industry. So that's just, I guess, one example. So there's a lot of opportunity in Western Australia. In Australia. So I'm based in Western Australia, but it's an exciting time, but it is a very challenging and difficult time when it comes to funding for those startups here.
All right, thank you, Conrad, for that. The last question that I have here for the panel, because I'd like to finish off with that, and obviously we talking throughout the entire 4 days about partnerships, treating space in a ethical way, meaning that sustainability does matter. So while I'm mentioning sustainability and ethics, which is obviously followed by legal practices, right? So the question here would be, how can early space startups effectively navigate the regulatory environment in the space industry, and what best practices should be followed to ensure compliance with all the relevant requirements? So that could be, again, downstream or upstream sector.
So I would jump in here. Pierre from Respectus, hello. So we actually focus on export control compliance. So this has to deal more with the, am I even allowed to ship or export my product to a different country, covering these regulatory questions that may arise. And here it can be difficult for startups, at least from what we've seen, is they don't know about certain regulations, or they might not see the regulation applicable to them, because they might develop a product that is purely for civil use in their mind, but in actual fact, the components built inside can be used for military purposes. And in this case, it always classifies as a dual use item, for which you then have to apply for a license. So this can be challenging for startups, is just going through the maze of these regulations, finding out, okay, what is applicable, and what does my product actually classify as? And so this we've seen is a challenge for some startups, and it's a question they don't ask themselves at the beginning, because they're so focused on the development part and creating their product.
I'll jump in real quick on this. From the regulatory standpoint, I'd say start with a posture of regulatory being a bit of a core competence. I think it's easy to group regulatory compliance and licensing, you know, in kind of this business operations function, right? When you get there, do it type concept. But in space, there's so many different regulatory things, and there's so many ways that you can leverage that to your advantage. It can be a business benefit to be good at regulatory, to get there first, to acquire those licenses, those approvals, those relationships. That's something you can actually take into an investor meeting and talk about. Whereas some other sectors, your regulatory or licensing is kind of a check the box thing. And I think in space in particular, and this extends to other, you know, aerospace sectors and mobility sectors as well, core competence and success there, showing milestones and progress there can actually help you. And so I'd say start with a bit of a regulatory posture that is, this is one of our core competences. This isn't an afterthought. This isn't something that comes a little bit later. You know, this is a day zero type focus.
I guess if I could, I'd just add on to what Patrick was saying and also advise, don't get distracted with this in the early days. I mean, it's important to keep your eye on regulatory and export control. You know, ITAR, EAR, they're all those issues are challenging, right? And you do need to navigate that at some point, but you know, make sure that you're on a path to successful product development with customers that care, and then you can really dig in on some of these regulatory things, but don't get so distracted by it early on that it keeps you off your path. And this is like this is probably one of the top 3 issues that space companies deal with in Europe and North America right now is how to play together across this regulatory landscape. It's challenging. And so I don't offer great solutions other than eventually you have to dig in, but don't get distracted by it too early on. Get some advisors that can help you with this. This is a great advisory role if you're a young company and you can offer an advisor, you know, some equity to partner with you or a paid advisory relationship when you need it. But I think that would be the right relationship in the early days before you're on a path to success where you've got to hire in-house to really bring this on as a core competency.
On to what Jeff was saying, in the space economy, there are companies that already actually provide this type of service. So like what Pierre was saying, Respect Us adds to that gap of knowledge to any startup that might not have that liquidity or might not have that knowledge, but needs to gain an awareness as to what is actually restricted in export control. So that could be hardware, that can be technology, that could even be software. And that is basically everything that we do in the space sector, because it's made to operate in the space environment. So a lot of this technology tends to be dual use and restricted. If you want to then sell it or commercialize it, you're going to have to deal with the restrictions that will come with it too. So make it easy for yourself and find the ones that know how to do it.
I just want to add on to Jeff and Sinan's comments for ITAR, it's the International Traffic in Arms Regulations. So it's super important. Portia, we met one of your founders, a startup from London, from the UK rather, in DC last week at the SAT show. And so if you haven't figured out if you're at the point where you need to worry about ITAR registration, as well as the United States munitions list, definitely retain that wise counsel and advisor. If you're in the States later this summer, I'm teaching at the University of New Hampshire Law School in San Francisco. We're going to go over ITAR regulations. And I bring this up because NASA's budget for fiscal year 2024 is $27 billion. Space Force is $30 billion. Space Force is 3 years old. They've just flipped NASA's budget. The DoD announced, the United States Department of Defense announced a budget for next year of $842 billion, but they didn't say how they were going to spend it yet. So if you do have a good product or service that you want to bring into America from the UK, from Kenya, Charles, if you're at that point, you got to have the conversation about ITAR before you actually come over here. Otherwise, you're going to burn a lot of money to learn everything in space is dual use.